It had already been explained to me by the closest incarnation to me. I was dead. He told me to keep quiet during the movie, but at first I didn't understand. I just dumbly asked how I died. I saw him, well, me, try to subdue a laugh as it was explained to me how they'd all watched me choke out on the tiny chicken bone I'd managed to get lodged in my throat. Apparently, it was amongst the top 5 worst ways some version of me had left the world yet. The strange thought occurred to me to sue the company who packaged the chicken strips before I realized I'd never be earning any money again whatsoever. Not just that, I'd never see Mom, Eric, anyone. My mind felt numb at the thought. It wasn't something that I could wrap my head around. I'd never sit in traffic again, never open my presents at Christmas, never enjoy the bittersweet smell of freshly roast coffee, never see Lara. Lara. The thought of her exploded in my mind like a firework. I'd left her behind. I'd left her with all those half-formed plans for the future that we'd never be able to put into action. She was probably laughing right now at the absurd way I went out. It was just her kind of dark humor. My heart felt heavy thinking of her. It was the first time I'd felt anything but shock since I sat down in this fucking cinema. I'd never see her again. I'd never watch that stupid little eye twitch she does as she falls asleep, never laugh at her otherwise shitty jokes just because she finds them so funny. Never feel her warmth next to me again as I drift off to sleep. No, now I get to watch my next incarnation. Part of me wanted to grab a selection of junk food like I'd usually do at the movies, but after I got used to the dark, I quickly realized there were no doors. Besides, even if there was, who the hell's gonna want to serve hot dogs in the afterlife? All that remained was me, what must have been hundreds of me, this room, and the next life. Suddenly, the screen came to life. As I watched my newest birth, the me sat next to me made sure I understood these first few years would be boring. Apparently, every cycle I'm a bad baby, always crying, whining. That crying was etched in my brain. The more I listened to it, the more I could hear myself a little in there. It was unmistakable. I watched as this woman, who was my mother, but not my mother, cared for me by herself. It was interesting that she was a single mother too, something my old life had in common with my new. The years dragged by. I went through the motions. I went through school. I made friends. I did slightly better in my grades than I had before. I watched myself make similar awkward mistakes as my teenage years. I watched myself scream the most horrible shit at my new mom, this new woman who had raised me. I laughed along with my new self and all the others watching. I cringed at my embarrassment. I felt disappointment. I felt like I was living again. Except I wasn't. Not really. This wasn't really my life. It was just a life. One of billions. I was watching someone who was both so familiar and a stranger to me. It was the little things. I didn't prefer baths to showers. I'd never get caught dead listening to techno music. It was me broadly, but not entirely. The similarities were there, though. I watched as I started college and settled down into a nearby cafe. Just another day. At this point, I was getting just as bored watching my life as this new me was living it. I was sitting, sipping on a coffee, doing everything I could to avoid a lecture. I noticed how busy the cafe was, and while I was trying to study, I could see the noise wouldn't allow that to happen. The hum of conversation. I saw myself look up at the seat across from me, no doubt seeing everyone else sitting with someone. That was one thing we had in common, a little bit of perpetual loneliness. I watched myself finish my coffee. I watched myself almost choke on the last drop. For a second, I thought I'd be dying the same way again, but I wasn't choking normally. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, both of me. I watched as Lara asked me, "Is this seat taken?" Not giving me a chance to answer as she planked herself in the seat across from me. I awkwardly struggled to say something, but all I could get out was a quiet, "No, you can sit there if you want." I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. I just watched it unfold dumbly. I watched the awkward silence as I could see myself wondering whether to start a conversation. I watched her look at me with that inquisitive look on her face she always had when she expected something. I had to stop myself shouting at the screen. I couldn't just let her walk away. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, it was her that broke the silence. I suppose I should have expected that. She jokingly asked why I was still sitting there when my coffee had been empty the full time. I couldn't feel it, but I knew my face had went red. I joked about how I was just daydreaming and that I didn't want to go to class. She replied simply, "Well, if you don't want to go, don't go." I watched myself spend that afternoon with her. I watched myself awkwardly ask for her number. No doubt I was terrified, but I couldn't face not seeing her again. Over the next few months, I felt myself fall in love with her again. I watched myself come up with new inside jokes that were different, yet the same. I watched her do her stupid little eye twitch as she fell asleep. I laughed at her shitty jokes just because of how funny she found them. I watched myself sleep next to her, and sometimes I swear I could feel her warmth as if she was right there beside me. I watched myself do what I'd never managed to do before. All those half-assed plans we had, while not the exact same, were still there, in spirit. We traveled together. I watched us have kids. I watched us grow old together. I was engrossed in every moment. I barely took my eyes off the screen, but when I did and I looked around, I saw the same sense of wonder and happiness written across my face countless times. They had to have seen this play out hundreds of times, over centuries and millennia, and it still touched them the same way it did me. Finally, I watched as she passed away first. Not in any funny way this time, just old age. But instead of sadness, the thought that crossed my mind was one of pure joy. She would pass on and enter a cinema somewhere. She would watch her life unfold again. For all the differences across her lifetime, she too would watch us meet each other, watch us fall in love again. Hell, she already had. We had together, even if not physically, and we would forever. I greeted the new me who arrived in the cinema with a smile on my face, and I told them to enjoy the movie.